Welcome and thanks for joining today. So my name is Cameron Stout. I'm a Senior Director at PackSize in the Partners Division. So I've got the pleasure of having James Malley on the call today with me. So thanks for joining, James, and why don't you give us a little introduction?
For sure. Thanks for having me, Cam. Excited to be here with you for this conversation. So I'm James Malley. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Paccurate. I've been in shipping technology since around 2009, focused on putting things in boxes as efficiently as possible since around 2018.
Well, yeah, and today, with this conversation, PackSize, kind of represents the hardware portion of right sizing, and James represents the software portion of right sizing. So, kind of a natural combination for us to come together and, just have a discussion about the state of the industry, where we see things going, and then also just innovation and maybe sharing a little bit about the work that we do together. So
That's a lot of pressure to put on each of us to represent both of those categories, Cam. Can you explain, if I could give you an extremely leading question, can you explain to a non-hardware person what right sizing is?
Sure. So right sizing, the most simple way to explain it is that we're converting a long piece of corrugated into a box that perfectly fits whatever you're shipping. So rather than you getting something on your doorstep where you've got a pen and it looks like the box could fit a shoe, we're going to be able to make that box that fits the pen perfectly. Our hardware is actually converting and taking information from a customer system or from some sort of dimensioning device and saying, okay, this is the exact size that it should do. But in order to do that, there is a software component. So, what is the software component, as it pertains to right sizing? How does software play a role?
Firstly, I'm kind of jealous of the terminology involved here because right sizing, I feel like rolls off the tongue and is easy to understand, whereas mine is cartonization, which I think most people in the industry, know at least at a high level what it's supposed to do. But the idea is you have an order drop in the warehouse, and there's some software or algorithm or process by which the right packaging is identified. So that could be stock boxes, mailers, bags, or a pack size machine. And so that's really where we have focused for a long time, and started with kind of a point solution cartonization engine that we thought was really fast and flexible, and then over time built a platform of tools around it to kind of better support our customers.
Yeah, and for better or worse, I describe your product as the world's best Tetris player. So, it's the fastest, smartest, best Tetris player that exists. So, I wanted to get your thoughts on just overall, like, what you're seeing out there, what you're seeing in kind of right sizing, the automation space, and then just, also the software space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus on packing and packaging efficiency has gone through a few kind of lurches forward over the past, call it, I don't know, 6 years. The pandemic kind of kicked off renewed interest. Costs started exploding, and companies step back, take this holistic view, and they're like, "Oh, there's more than labor in front of me. There's actually things I can do to affect a bigger cost center." And I think that's actually happened again this year. Really, it's kind of the perfect storm of reasons too. You've got, again, rising costs. You've got shrinking margins because of tariffs. You've got a Gen Z centric consumer base that is far less tolerant of perceived waste, even, and so I think, like, the trend year to year and season to season seems to, at least in automation, seems to lurch between, okay, we got to figure out picking or labor. We got to figure out a way to bring robots in, or whatever the automation is to fix labor. And then it's like, oh, well, wait a second. Now we gotta go fix packing or packaging efficiency so that we're not lopsided. So at this very moment that you're asking me this question, it seems like there's a massive resurgence in interest in this. Are you seeing the same?
Yeah, and to rewind the tapes a little bit, I think that you've also experienced like rapid advancements in hardware, because the machines and the capabilities, that exist today just flat out didn't exist 5 years ago. They just weren't fast enough, right? So, in turn, if you wanted to right size, you had to be very committed, but then you needed to, be able to withstand a few hurdles, right? And I think that those hurdles, operationally, it's still a different kind of implementation. It's a different workflow, and you're fundamentally changing the warehouse by putting packaging automation in. However, those hurdles are much smaller today. So just from a sheer speed standpoint, and I think that that's really driven adoption. And we're kind of seeing the same thing. So we're having a banner year at pack size, on top of a banner year, on top of a banner year. So our growth rate, is kind of bucking the trend that you're seeing even in corrugated in general. Corrugated on the whole, container board or just actual manufacturing is down, but pack size is up, which is an exciting thing to be a part of. But I think a lot of that has to do with just overall capabilities. And then when we talk about adoption, I think another thing that's pushing the market is that you're seeing just very large announcements from very large enterprises, right, saying that we are making a cognizant effort to right size. So you see that with Walmart, you see that with Amazon, where they're telling the world like, hey, we are doing this, and they're telling the world for a reason, right? And a main one is that the customers are demanding it, but then also just from a cost savings perspective, it's just you alluded to it, but the costs keep rising, right? And if the costs are not rising fast enough, then the rules get changed. So it's a very convenient thing, when you own a majority of the supply chain and you can write the rules, and somehow, some way, if one group makes a change, magically the next group makes a change. So
Yeah.
from an analysis perspective, when you guys are looking at it, like, I guess there's been some recent changes, and maybe it's too early to tell, but in the last couple of months, FedEx and UPS have fundamentally changed their roundup rules. How has that impacted things, and are you guys seeing that in simulation data right now?
Absolutely. I think this is kind of like a salt in the wound sort of change because there was kind of an onslaught of not just like the GRI. The GRI is like not that thing that everybody waits for anymore. The general rate increase from the big two. It's really where are they going to slip in like surcharges that I didn't foresee that now I have to account for and model out. So it takes a lot more work to kind of anticipate and forecast what your costs are going to be. But the fact that they changed the rounding rules, it used to follow normal rounding rules so that they would say if your package is 5.4 inches, then we'll call it 5. If it's 5.5 or more, we'll call it 6. Well, the justification is not like super clear to me, but they did that, and so what it's caused is, I think, a surprising cost increase, especially for, call it like everybody but the top 100 shippers in terms of volume that may have negotiated out, really, really impactful dimensional weight rating. Everybody else is seeing this increase, and it's not something they can negotiate because it's a process change. It's that the carriers announced. It's not like, oh, this is an extra fee based on your contract. So we see that a lot. I have a genuine question for you that I was thinking about this morning. I know that kind of one of the benefits of on-demand packaging is that it can actually end up saving space in a warehouse because you talk to folks that don't have any packaging automation, sometimes get on a Zoom call and they're like squished between pallets of various types of packaging. I was curious if that has been driving more interest. Some of these folks that are investigating like ASRS on the other side to save space. Is that a more top of mind reason now because of economic uncertainty where they're like, we can't like build a new location right now because that's a big bet. We need to make the most of what we have.
Yeah. It definitely is. If you just think about it, if you're a medium to high shipper, right, you're going to need to have a lot of on-hand inventory. And then if you don't, then you're relying on a third party, to bring things in, which is also has a cost attached to it, right? There's value to it, and you get a little bit more predictability with your inventory. But most of the time when you walk into a warehouse that's moving, a tremendous amount of volume, you'll just see racks and racks and racks and racks and racks of corrugated, right? And just stock boxes. So because say you're running 13 different sizes, you need to make sure you've got enough stock on hand, because if you run out, then you're out. What do you do, right? You have to start making costly decisions, and sometimes even our customers or potential clients don't even understand the impact of that, right? What happens if you run out of your largest runner, right? Well, you usually have to go up in size. If you go up in size, not only does that box cost you more, but it's going to cost you more, just going out the door. Not to mention if it's, it used to be a game of inches, now it's a game of fractional inches, right? So literally every millimeter kind of counts it at this point. So, but what we see is that, for the most part, most of our customers can handle either 1 to 2 truckloads of material. So usually, in most warehouses, it's about 200 to 300 pallet positions. We're able to reduce that down to 52. That obviously makes room for for other things, right? And it's all about density, because real estate has not gotten any cheaper. It's not going to get any cheaper, right? So how much value can you extract from every square foot of your warehouse is really the true question. And we can help with that. So in some cases it's a big driver, especially if it's like you talked about, a brownfield, where they've been there for a while, and it's just like your house, right? When you first move into your house, you've got all this room, you feel everything feels spacious, and then 10 years goes by, and then you need to do 3 truckloads to Goodwill or to Savers just to clear space, right? So for us, it's that. But then I guess the last point on that is just kind of obsolescence too, right? It's like if you're using a small amount of bale sizes, right? Corrugated can only last on the shelf for so long. If things shift, say your highest runner becomes a CRD runner now, you're just sitting on that inventory. It's going to go to waste. It's not going to be useful anymore. And we see that happen about 6 months. And then say you've got sweat dripping off your forehead in the middle of Atlanta in a non-air conditioned warehouse, then you can take that down to 3 months in the summer environment. So with you guys, and I know that you've been working a little bit just about like the actual operation of packaging, right? And how do you solve that problem from a software perspective? And you've got some really innovative ideas, and I'd love to hear about just how you're thinking about the problem first. So just defining it, and then what is the problem, and then what is the solve.
Yeah. Um, well, we started with this, point solution and kind of the attitude of we'll take your order data and we'll send back the packing answer as fast as possible. We're not going to like bother anybody. We're not, we're just this like little augment that you can slide in the side. And, it's like a high impact cost savings lever, and we'll stay out of everybody else's way. Um, that's really evolved over time. I think, our optimization, we optimize for cost. So cost could be, a negotiated carrier contract, and what that incentivizes in terms of packaging. It could be material costs, labor costs, could be hazmat. Put this hazmat item in this box and you get a fee, etc. But I think like once that's in place, and people kind of get used to it. It's like, yes, Packurate's driving our packaging decisions in real time. I get it. But what we found over time after having, especially larger customers for longer, that they wanted more control. They would get a new SKU that was fragile, or they would, get some item that was squishy, and the only way for them to really deal with kind of modifying the code base was to either bring, a basket of muffins to their internal IT team and hope that they're nice enough to kind of jump their roadmap for you, or look for room in the budget to pay your WMS, to make a code change. Um, we just found, like, it was a huge source of frustration of just not the operator specifically not being able to be hands-on and just make a change. It really shouldn't be this kind of, like, out of reach thing to control what's going on the pack line. It's very, like, basic SOPs and some, more complicated ones. And so we launched something we call Pack Manage, which allows our customers to log in, say, I have an order, it's got this item or this category of items that requires this special consideration. Let me let me make that rule change, test it across like a big order sample to make sure it doesn't, cause any unintended consequences, and then deploy it live without any code change. So while we were, kind of founded on this idea of optimization and really complex math, it's been really interesting the almost like emotional reaction, from people just having a little bit more control over a part of their operations. So that's what we've been most excited about, lately.
Yeah, and can you just maybe expand on like some of the IT lift involved in making SKU level changes, right? Because that's kind of what you're talking about, right? And maybe yeah, just what does it look like for a standard customer? I know that you talked about just taking muffins to the IT team. Like, what are the muffins for?
The muffins are to indicate that the IT team who, almost certainly is extremely busy and putting out fires themselves, that they should pay attention to your problem, and your problem might be pretty significant. It might be this new SKU we got is, always showing up, busted into a million pieces, and I have no way of solving that, because IT's busy. All I can do is try to solve it with process. I can, stick a post-it note next to all the pack stations that says, if you see this item, throw some bubble wrap on it. If it's a complicated category of SKUs, I may have to just solve it in a brute force way by saying to my packers, just put 4 feet of bubble on everything. And then this isn't my problem anymore because IT was busy and I fixed it. Obviously, unintended consequences of that are a tremendous amount of environmental waste and almost certainly a huge increase in transportation costs. So, giving a little bit, it's not just control, it's like speed and the ability to react to changing conditions. I think is what's resonating.
Okay, yeah, and I want to add a few things to that, right? Because it does boil down to like this master data concept, right? And dimensions in general and dimensional integrity is more important now than it ever has been, right? And let's just take off the the pack size pack unit caps for a second, right? If you're going to do any or if you're going to maximize any kind of advanced technology, right, where you're literally buying it to increase the density of your warehouse, right? Specifically like an ASRS, right? If you want to maximize the available storage and the available space that you've got, you need to understand how large the items are that you're storing, right? So if you're off on that, then it's very difficult. And then if you have a and then the other part is that manipulating master data has a lot of unintended consequences that have nothing to do with the warehouse, right? So if you are meddling in ERP data, right? And all of a sudden, you've got manufacturing teams that have questions if you're a manufacturer, or if you've got procurement teams that are asking, "Hey, why was this changed?" Right? You have your side of the story, but they have their side of theirs, right? And it almost really just calls for just two separate, not necessarily redundant databases, in order to do that. And really, kind of what you're saying is okay. Let's bring over your master data as it sits, right? But we're going to give you the ability to make adjustments on the fly so that this database that doesn't have any consequences outside of the four walls of the warehouse can be adjusted. So
Or
I just
you could augment your item master, as it were. I think that's definitely one of the biggest surprises, I think, to me in the early days, especially as we started to work with kind of larger enterprise clients, is the item master, the database that's supposed to say how big these things are. It's like a weirdly political hot potato where
oh yeah.
you run the risk of causing real organizational problems with, maybe the marketing team owns it in your org, or maybe, accounting owns it in your org. One universal thing that we've heard from all of our customers is that they can't trust any data that comes from the manufacturer,
Right.
which is really interesting. I actually don't know why that is, but that's not a path that's advisable to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, good. I think one thing that we kind of run into quite a bit, and it's a question that we get, and especially in the partner space, is okay, you're going to right size packaging, and we're going to make a box that perfectly fits whatever you're shipping, right, or perfectly fits it in a reasonable way so that you can still pack into it. Common question we get is just, hey, how am I going to instruct anyone to actually package into these boxes, right? And how is it going to not slow us down, right? Because I think that everyone, thinks of it as like this, kind of curated dance that needs to take place. And a lot of times we say, hey, your operators, like, they have eyes, they have ears, they have hands, right? They're going to be relatively quick on their feet, but say they just needed a crutch to do that, like, how would you go about solving that problem?
Yeah, the way we think about it is just another cost, right? So, do you want a packer spending an extra 30 seconds fitting something together? Probably not all the time, but what if the packing configuration avoids a really expensive surcharge? Maybe you do. So every organization is different and have different costs in each of these areas. So it's really just about calibrating what you're optimizing for any given shipment. That's how we think about it. I mean, on the very like basic level, and this might be more common with kind of a SMB level customers, but they might just reserve like 5% of the space, and just use that as like well, this is enough wiggle room. Um, I think once they start banging away at it and kind of looking to continuously improve, then they move away from that and try to think about cost the way I described.
Yeah. All right. Well, I kind of wanted to get real for a second and just talk about, like,
Oh
you
no.
know two two things. One, right, and we like to paint a picture that this is of all the benefits, right, and everything that is good. But what do you see on implementation? Like, what are some of the operational hurdles that you guys run into? That just maybe prevent customers from really maximizing the value of your product, that, or just like, what do they need to be thinking about? How do they get prepared for your journey?
Yeah, I think, well, we already talked about dimensions, and that's really kind of essential to everything that we do. They don't have to be perfect, but there should be an opportunity to perfect them or improve them over time, as a matter of course. Um, I will say, we spend a lot of time doing ROI analyses and simulations, and kind of helping people get comfortable with KPIs first.
Mhm.
Because depending on some WMSs are really easy to hook into, others might charge you some money to do it. So as someone on my team says, the juice has to be worth the squeeze, or there has to be enough meat on the bone. We've got a lot of idioms here back here. Uh, those are really the two big considerations. But the idea is, if you have that prerequisite data, at least in a decent state, if you can make the time and prioritize the integration after that, then everything becomes a lot easier. And it's kind of, keeping both our and the customer's kind of eye on the ball of like where we're trying to get is like an easier life really at the end of the tunnel.
For us, I mean, a lot of it is the same, and I think the challenges, kind of are the challenges, right? And what we face, like, we're both trying to solve the same problem, right? Which is what makes us such strong partners. You couldn't find a more natural pairing than pack size and pack accurate, right? So, it's dimensions. I think the second piece is just, it almost comes before you implement anything. It's just like, thinking end to end and thinking about a holistic solution, right? And how are you going to get, how are you going to get cartons to the right place, right? Because they're no longer just going to be sitting on the shelf next to someone for, allowing them to make, the bad decision. We're making the decision for them about what box something should be picked into. So I think it is process flow. It's in and it's out, right? And just making sure that you're not creating bottlenecks and making sure that you're matching rate, of different systems, because if you've got one system that can move 10 times faster than the output, it's kind of like having a V8 engine with a half-inch tailpipe, right? It's just going
Yeah.
to cause a lot of unintended consequences. So I think operationalizing it, and having a plan to say, okay, this is how we are actually going to take this technology, and integrate it into either existing workflows or make changes, to make sure that it does integrate well. So if you can get that right, then it's a matter of just kind of continuing to twist the knobs, right? Which is why I love, like, what you guys have with the pack manage and the pack control system. It really does allow you to kind of make those changes, because it's super interesting to see, like, how once you have the equipment, once everyone's wrapped their arms around it, right? You get how you learn how to, kind of play the fiddle, so to speak. Then it becomes like, all right, well, are you actually maximizing the investment? And what we see, and what the manifestation is usually it's like boxes are either way too big or way too small, right? If they're too big, okay, great. You're just burning money, and you're just lying, you're just paying much more than you need to, in today's day and age with the technology that's available to you. But if it's too small, well, then you're creating downstream problems, right? Where you need to repack, because either you decide to just, someone decides to just shove it in there, and then a package explodes, right, as it's vibrating, or as it's getting moved around, or as it's kind of, sometimes just getting lofted into a truck. You've got things that break, and then your product doesn't get there on time, right? And then and then back to just the too big, the chances of it breaking are just significantly higher. So if it's too large, you can either spend too much money on void fill, you can, or you just do nothing, right, and just kind of hope that everything gets there okay.
Yeah.
So
You said something. You said the word holistic, which gets used a lot in our space, but there is something different about the last, like, call it, I don't know, 12 to 18 months, where automation specifically, it seems like consultants and integrators are kind of taking a step back and looking more, because I think about back when AMRs really came onto the scene in earnest, and kind of took the industry by storm. The follow-on effect was like, well, I got rid of this bottleneck in picking, you know, good job, everybody.
yeah,
But then their only, recourse was to go, because the bottleneck would move to the pack station. Their only recourse was to add like 20 pack stations, because they didn't really know what else to do. So I think, you mentioned our partnership is like a no-brainer. And we, go into, a location together, and we figure out how to quickly, design the best solution. But I've been surprised, kind of how much we, and I think you too, work with, those picking automation providers now, because everything's so interconnected. You can't just I can't just operate, even just with cartonization. I can't operate in this, little bubble of like, I'm gonna make the best packs, that the world has ever seen, because if it screws up some sort of picking flow, or whatever it is on the bot, or in the automated storage and retrieval system, um, not going to work. It's not going to have the intended outcome. So it's just really interesting how these segments, like Slam and upstream segments, are starting to collaborate more. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that change.
yeah, I think the word that comes to mind is differentiation, right? So you've got, what you've seen is that, either companies have been, kind of repping using the same picking technology for a very long time, right? So, and then competitors have also, you know, they've risen, right? So the picking space is extremely competitive, whether it's a traditional technology and others have access to it, or whether it is, upstarts and just new ways to solve the problem, right? There's 10 roads to Rome rather than two, so everyone's got a different way to do this. So, how do you differentiate yourself in that environment when maybe there is cost pressure on you that didn't exist before? Maybe there is, you need to figure out how to further optimize, right? Because say you put some picking technology in and you take 70% of the labor out, right? Then what, right? Where do you go from there? And it's not like the lean teams in these groups or the continuous improvement groups. It's not like, well, way to go, guys! Like you
Time
earned
to
the
pack it in.
yeah. Let's go find ourselves a hobby, right? Not how this is going to happen, right? It's like year on year improvement and driving costs out of the operation is always the key. So I think the most natural place to look is just say, okay, well, where's our next biggest waste bucket? And really, I think what we try to get people to understand, or maybe like even the most difficult thing for us, like the most difficult bridge for us to cross, is that you're talking about with our solutions, it's like you have impacts within the four walls, right? And those can be labor, those can be material, and those have like real-time P&L benefits just for that actual warehouse. But what doesn't, which is actually our largest impact, is outbound logistics, because it's outside of the warehouse, which usually with most companies it's structured as outside their P&L, right? So it's just an entirely different group. So that may earn the Employee of the Year award for the head of transportation, but it's not going to do anything. And we find ourselves just so commonly associated with VP of Ops, Director of Supply Chain, VPs of Supply Chain. So you're talking to this group, and it's like, okay, well, that I love that. That's going to help me with my internal justification, right? But it may not help me. It's kind of an interesting dynamic that we run into.
We run into that all the time too. It's like no one's. I don't think anybody's ever said this, but it's like I am working really hard, collaborating with you on this solution to give that other guy a win in the other department that has no idea how hard my job is. Um, and
That, or
it,
it just doesn't even, like, it's like everyone has KPIs, right? Everyone has OKRs, whatever flavor you want to call them, right? And you're literally gainfully employed to hit those. It's not like the most cynical thing in the world. It's just like, hey, this is what I'm measured on.
that's
This is
that's just how organizations are set up. So what is the answer to that? I mean, obviously it's not blocking adoption in any like huge way, but do you have to go all the way to the CFO to really make the business case to the organization, or is there enough in your mind like cross collaboration and things like that to make it a you don't need to run to mom to kind of explain the impact?
I think it's dependent on the customer. It's more of a sales challenge than anything, right? It's just like, managing the decision-making unit, making sure that, if you attempt to gain access, right? And if you can't gain access, then you need to coach your champion or whoever's involved, just on how to tell the story, right? And how to tell it correctly, and also, make sure that they understand, okay, well, this is how it's going to impact here's how it's going to impact inside the four walls, right? Here's how it's going to help you. Here's the benefits of it. Make sure that, there's a collaborative effort to build a business case that everyone can stand behind, but then at the same time, it's like, hey, but this is also, there's a lot of other value to your organization, right? Because there's marketing value, the sustainability impacts, there's outbound logistics savings, right? There's reverse logistics implications with reducing damages, which is a major concern, across everyone that ships directly to a consumer right now. So I think there's just, kind of a lot of different ways to go about it, but if I had the magic wand, there's just two things I would solve. Number one is just, getting people to understand the cost of doing nothing. That's number one. Status quo is the biggest enemy. It's easier just to stay comfortable than to get uncomfortable and to grow. And then the second is just, being able to cascade the message or the value just throughout an organization just with a little bit more ease.
Yeah, that makes sense. It certainly seems like in the past, I'm just making this up, but it seems recent, maybe the past like 6 months, integrators specifically starting to incorporate transportation savings in their business cases, in their bids, which almost, it feels like kind of a hack or like an obvious things because and I might get in trouble for generalizing the percentages, but I think transportation average, call it like 50 to 60% of the cost, whereas labor is like 40 to 50. And so if like picking automation saves 40% of picking labor, that's really only like 10% of total labor. There's this whole other 10% of transportation sitting over here. Why wouldn't you kind of incorporate, any kind of strategy to claim it and bring it into a client location? Um, so, I've seen that, come up, and it seems like they're getting some traction with that.
It's a massive lever, right? It dwarfs what we have in material savings. It dwarfs what we have, in void fill reductions and other things, right? It is the largest bucket, and then it's also becoming a harder problem to solve, right? Because every time you think that you've solved it, okay, well, here's your goalpost. The field goal used to be good here. Now it's not because the goalpost is here, right? And it's just, it's a dynamic thing, and the rules and the surcharges and all of these things, they are ever evolving, and it seems like it's just happening more, and that's what I've seen at least. It's just it used to be, you talked about it at the start of kind of this podcast. It's just, well, GRI, everyone, okay, the sun comes up in the east, the calendar flips over, January 1st, January 6th, whatever day, the first week of January, I've got, a new set of charges, right? That I'm baking in. It's coming. I know it, right? But what's been happening is just more of like, just kind of just tweaking the thing, much to the chagrin of mathematicians worldwide. It's like,
And 4th grade graduates.
yeah, no, I mean, I worked hard to understand how rounding, and now I don't. Now I'm just lost. So
So I feel like we could talk about ops. This has been a very like operational heavy conversation, but I think it's also worth mentioning like our love of solutioning is not the only thing that binds pack size and pack Hero together. It's really like the mission, right? While and I, to talk about real talk in the United States, at least, we uh, we don't really lead our call it, our sales pitch with the sustainability benefits. But I think it is as ingrained in your organization of like the why we do what we do, as it is in ours. Um, is that something you could talk about a little bit too?
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, because I think there's a lot of different reasons, right? And some that I could speak to on this podcast, and some that I can't, right? But I think just in general, like sustainability in a lot of people's eyes is just something that is actually going to end up being a something that adds to cost. So when you lead with that, or when you talk about it, then there's just that natural association, right? It's this almost direct correlation to say, okay, well, this is probably going to cost me more money to do the right thing, right? So my budget is not, it doesn't have these factors built into it, right? And actually it's doing the opposite, right? My budget is getting tighter, and my controls are getting tighter, and I'm asked to be doing more with less. Like, it's literally every company everywhere, right? Do more with less. So, these groups are no different, but I think the separator is that, and I think how we approach it is to say, okay, it's sustainability that actually that's got a positive impact, and it's got a positive payback. Because a majority of, when we find the right customer profile, like our machines net out very quickly. And you get the sustainability benefits because it's a pragmatic solution, right? It is a pragmatic solution to the problem. It's simple to understand. It's just make the box smaller. you can fit more on there, right? You use less paper. Paper requires trees. Trees require water and sunlight and tending. Like it's all things where it actually it's pragmatic, and I don't know that every sustainable solution out there is like that, and then there's also just other connotations that go along with it,
Yeah.
but it is really the right thing to do, and just the personal part of it for me is just I don't really care where you land on the political spectrum. Like, all I care about is that my child has clean air to breathe, right? And that has an environment that is worth living in. And even if it's just like the immediate environment, forget all the global stuff. It's just I just want my child to have clean air to breathe, and I don't think that's too much to ask.
Yeah. And I think you work on this problem set for long enough. Um, it's just stunning, just because of the economies of scale we're dealing with. Even
Yeah.
making tiny tweaks to packaging have this like cascade effect throughout the supply chain. I mean, speaking of air to breathe, I mean, I live in a city, and so, the idling delivery trucks all up and down the block every day, I worry about that with my kids. And I think what we found is that if you're able to shrink your average box, carton size, um, by say 13% or whatever it is, 20%, it almost acts as you kind of follow all the packages downstream. It almost, at least mathematically, kind of acts like a liquid. So you almost have the exact same reduction in truckloads over time. And so the CO2 equivalent reduction is truly massive at scale, when people invest in this. And to your point, whether they're trying to be greener or not, they're going to be.
No, but it's something. Okay, well, if you do it for no other reason, then it's going to save you and your company money. Then do it for that. It's like, and that's the nice thing about it, is that we don't have to you don't have to win that battle every day, because we're winning the battle by proxy, right? What you do, what we do, we're just winning it by proxy. So, overall, James, really appreciate the time. I think this was a great conversation. Always love talking to you. Enjoy the partnership that we share. Look forward to continuing to build and reach greater heights. So
Thanks,
thank
Cam.
you.
Thank you.